Hi, this is Tori Ramey for RD Academics in today to teach ownership of real estate and the transfer of real property. Okay, again, my name is Tori Ramey. I've been a realtor since 2001. I am a broker salesman, and I teach also post-licensing instruction, so it's possible that after you get your license, you will see me again. Today we're going to talk about ownership. We're going to talk about estates and the different types of holding title, deed restrictions and encumbrances on a deed, transfer of ownership, and public and private land use. Okay, under estates, there are two types of main estates, freehold and leasehold. A freehold estate is where the rights are conveyable, exclusive possession and use, and have an immobility and indeterminate duration. What does that mean? Well, that means they're the strongest rights you can get. And you have possession and use of the property for as long as you own it. Fee simple absolute is a form of freehold estate and is the highest form. It's sometimes called fee simple absolute and sometimes just fee simple. Because it's the most complete form of ownership, the fee simple owner has the right to possess, use the land, and to dispose of the land as he or she wishes. They can even give it away or trade it for other things. There are no restrictions on this. Fee simple absolute, again, has the most rights and the least limitations, is indefeasible. Defeasible estates. This is different, much different than a freehold estate or fee simple. It's voidable, and the use and possession is voidable. And a defeasible estate is created when a grantor transfers the land conditionally. So I'm going to sell you this land, but there's a condition with it. Okay, whatever that condition may be. All right. Fee simple determinable and fee simple subject to conditions subsequent. Again, these are just all different conditions. Fee simple subject to executory limitations. In other words, the executor of somebody's will may have a limitation on what they can do with that property. So your deed may be subject and your title may be subject to that limitation. A finite estate means limited to a lifetime or somebody else's lifetime. So, in other words, a life estate, fragmented possession and use for duration of someone's life. Per autre vie, which is a French term that means for another life. So, in other words, seller A could sell to buyer B. But buyer B has to give the property back upon Mr. C's death, a completely different person in the transaction, or upon their death. It depends on what the deed restriction is. Okay? And that's what a life estate is. A fee tail estate is the inalienable rights of inheritance for duration of family line. In other words, it passes down to the family line. But once the family line is at an end, then it reverts back to whatever the deed restriction is. Okay? Leasehold estates. There are four main types of leasehold estates, each having specific characteristics as to the lease period and the relationship between the landlord and the tenant. The four types of lease estates are estate for years, estate for period to period, estate at will, and estate at sufferance. Now here's the difference. Estate for years is estate for a specific term, like a one-year lease that we're all used to hearing. A periodic tenancy is automatic renewing lease, say is your month-to-month type leases that you're familiar with. Okay? An estate at will is a leasehold for no fixed time period, and it lasts as long as both parties desire. It's not written, they just say, yeah, you can keep staying there. Okay? Termination of this is bilateral. Either party can terminate at any time. So at sufferance, the tenancy at sufferance is created when a tenant remains after the lease expires. Most of us call these squatters. But it can become a holdover lease if the lease is approved or the tenant staying there is approved by the landlord. Okay? Okay, so what I'd like to do now is go back over the information we just covered and cover some of the more important areas of this. Under freehold estate, fee simple absolute is what you're going to see the most of. Probably 95% of all real estate transactions involve this type of ownership in residential real estate. It has the most rights and the least limitations, and is indefeasible. In defeasible estates, a defeasible estate is created when a grantor transfers land conditionally. For instance, a seller will sell a land to the buyer, but he'll tell him you cannot run livestock on that big parcel. If you do, he can get the property back. Okay? You might see that in some parts of Nevada or some other type of condition. On a finite estate or a life estate, you have a fragmented possession and use for a duration of someone's life. Pour autre vie, again, a French term, means for another's life. So what will happen is a seller will sell to the buyer, and the buyer can use that land and have all possessions and rights up until either they die or someone else outside of the transaction, say their parents or somebody else, dies. And then the land reverts back to the owner or whoever the deed has the restriction to, whoever says gets that land back. Okay? Under leasehold, there are 4 main types that you need to know. You need to know the estate for years, which is basically a term, a 1-year lease term or a 2-year lease term. Okay, a periodic tenancy, which is your basic month-to-month, an automatic renewing lease month-to-month, or week-to-week even in some places. An estate at will, which is a tenancy at will, which means a leasehold for no fixed time period. It lasts as long as both parties are okay with it. All right. An estate at sufferance is a tenancy at sufferance created when a tenant remains after the lease is expired. Now, if the landlord is okay, it becomes a holdover tenant and a holdover tenancy. All right, these are the most important parts of this section. In a minute, we'll move on to title.